Hi there, Writing 101 students. This is Dr. Gurley. This is your proficiency exam review, or part of it. And this is also your review for your first draft of the essay on national service, which is also practice for the proficiency exam. So this lecture is about 45 minutes. I'm going to go through the essay instructions and review what we've been doing in class all semester. The essay, part 3, is asking you to do exactly the same things that we've been doing in class all term. So don't be confused or surprised by some of the slightly different language. You're being asked to do exactly the same things. So what I will do first is read through those directions. Step by step, you will see very similar directions on December 1st when you take this actual exam. And really, do not be afraid. Trust yourselves, be careful, you know what to do. And review this lecture as often as you want if it helps to ease your nerves. I was telling you in class that I have some test anxiety, and just seeing an exam once before I take it, at least once, kind of helps me. So let's turn to the directions, and you will then, after we discuss them, we'll talk about the readings that were assigned for this week, these national service readings. And then we'll discuss the essay prompts, or the questions. I use the word prompts, the questions that follow this essay on this practice proficiency exam, okay? So that essay, as you all know, is due on Monday. Forget what the date is now. Monday, well, the Monday coming up. Those of you in my classes know. Feel free to share this lecture with anyone you like who's also taking Writing 101 this term. Okay. So directions, I'm going to read through, read the following 3 news articles, and respond to one or more of them in a fully developed essay of 600 to 800 words. The essay here, the emphasis here is on the development of your ideas and not on the number of words. Do not simply add filler to reach the minimum word limit. So this is what we've been discussing all term. You've been writing for me 900-word essays, roughly 900-word essays. This is slightly shorter. You do have 3 hours to write this exam, so 600 to 800 words. You've been doing for me 900 words in a first draft and then a second draft. You should be able to write a decent short essay, 600 to 800 words, on these shorter, relatively shorter readings compared to what we've been doing in class in 3 hours. You should be able to do a good job if you've been working steadily all term, okay? So let's go through. It's a fully developed essay. That is an argument. An essay is an argument, right? It is exactly what we've been talking about all term. Essay, argument. We're writing an argumentative essay. Emphasis on development of ideas. We've talked about this, right? A line of thinking. You present well, we'll get to that in a minute. Development of ideas, not number of words. So you should easily be able to write 600 to 800 words without thinking about the word count if you're writing an essay that has enough evidence, that's clearly describing everything it needs to describe, and we'll come back to that. We will expect you to focus on a particular issue and to formulate a response to that issue in a clear thesis statement. So the language that I tend to use is a claim, a clear claim. Thesis means the same thing, but out in the real world, very often, we don't hear the word thesis. There's a claim. It's what's your claim? What's your claim here? What's the claim of this article? What's the claim of the show? What's the claim of the presentation? So we'll expect you to focus on a particular issue. Remember, focus. We talk about focus. Don't say everything in the world. Don't just grab a bunch of stuff and throw it into the essay just because you can. Focus on a particular issue. You will be discussing national service as an issue, but some sort of issue within that, and we'll talk about that when we get to the readings and to the prompts or to the questions that follow. Formulate, a response. This is an argument. So you write an argument, formulate a response using in a clear thesis statement, a clear primary claim. Do not simply summarize or paraphrase the articles. So don't just tell me what they're saying randomly. We've discussed this in class a lot, right? Use what you need to develop your claim and your ideas. Develop a thesis or a claim of your own. You should construct an argument in support of this thesis or claim using good reasoning and solid evidence, and you should also anticipate and respond to potential counter-arguments. Now, we've discussed how to constantly imagine that you're trying to address someone who might and probably will potentially disagree with you, right? So what I want you to do here is, you can think about this in two ways. You can either present an argument, a counter argument. Okay, picking up again, you probably heard my dog. He gets very excited about writing 101. He just loses his mind. Anyway, he's in the other room. So we'll talk about the counter argument. So you want to constantly imagine that you're dealing with someone or talking, having a conversation with someone who may not agree with you. So you don't want to make certain assumptions. You don't want to simply assert what you're saying as if it's a fact and no one would ever possibly imagine a way to disagree with you. So you want to constantly have this other interlocutor in mind who might not agree. And what you might want to do on this exam, probably the clearest way to do this is to have, one solid paragraph devoted to counter argument or refuting a precise claim that someone might make against your precise argument. Not a random claim someone might make, not something unrelated, but a precise claim, and we'll talk about that when we review this. But in general, you always want to sort of have in mind as you're writing someone who might disagree, just so you're careful, just so you don't say things like, obviously any intelligent person would think this, or all people everywhere believe X. You don't want to sort of say things like that. You want to imagine that there are instances in which, you could be disagreed with, you could be disputed. And, in the real world, if we're not dealing with facts, then we're dealing with arguments all the time. So the fact that the sky is blue is something that can't be disputed. But what you think about person X, Y, or Z for your particular reason certainly could be disputed, right? So these are arguments or cases you want to make for something. So try not to act like yours is the only view that has ever been possible on issue X, all right? Try to imagine that lots of intelligent people could disagree and have good reasons for disagreeing. In fact, if someone can't reasonably disagree with you, then you're probably not saying anything. You're probably saying the sky is blue. I want to argue that the sky is blue, which of course is not really worth arguing, right? It's just a fact. So what we want to do then is, probably for this exam, deal with a counter argument in one paragraph somewhere, and don't just say that someone could disagree with you. Try to really explain how someone could take some particular point of issue with your argument and try to show why your view of it is more persuasive. Understanding that, you're not dealing with fact here, but you're dealing with, making a case for how to understand something. So try to show, don't just summarize what someone might say. Explain it clearly, summarize it, and then deal with it. Try to show why that refutation or that counter argument is not as persuasive as what you have to say. So do your best to do that. We encourage you to use the full 3 hours to engage in pre-writing activities, to write a first draft, and to make global revisions to your draft, and to make local revisions of grammar and punctuation to your final draft. Proofread and write legibly. Okay, so pre-writing activities. That's not a term that I've actually used, but we've been doing this all semester. So, excuse me, you want to think about what you have to say. You want to read very carefully. You want to clearly understand the key terms, define the terms in what you're reading so that you know what you're responding to. so that you know what you have to say in your own argument. You want to perhaps, depending on how you put an essay together, perhaps you want to write a first draft quickly and go back and pull out the main ideas. Figure out what your primary claim is. Perhaps you want to outline your essay first, but spend some time really making sure that you understand what the reading is saying, that you really understand what its key terms are and how they're being defined. Not how you would define them, but how the readings or the authors of these readings would define them. Okay? So when we say write a first draft, certainly write a first draft, and then you could rewrite again. You'll be given 2 separate blue books when you come in on this day. You can write a first draft and you can write your final draft in a second one. Global revisions means, the language that I've used, thoroughly revise it if you need to. If you don't need to, don't. But just be careful. You know what to do. We've been drafting a first essay, figuring out what goes where, what the claim is, the primary claim, what our primary terms are, how we're defining those terms, and then we're being sure that we have points in a line of thinking, in a line of argument, that are represented one at a time, discussed one at a time, one idea per paragraph. Don't confuse everything. One idea, connection to the next idea, and in the next paragraph, move on. All right? So you can make local revisions, meaning smaller changes, right? We've been rewriting alt sentences all term. You know how to do that. You're all very good at it when you choose to be, right? So do it. Punctuation, be careful. Proofread. Don't turn in an essay that's full of sloppy mistakes. And write legibly. Write as clearly as you can. As you've seen, my handwriting is not the greatest. I do my best on the board. I don't use the board very much, though. So you're not going to fail this exam if you don't write clearly. So don't think about it that way. But just do the best you can to write as clearly as you can. But you are not being graded or evaluated on your penmanship, okay? I promise you, you're not being evaluated on how neatly you write. No one really cares, okay? The point is that try to write as clearly as you can so that we can understand what you're saying, okay? Before the articles, I'm continuing back with the directions. We've included a short summary of the Universal National Service Bill, in quotations, which you may use in your argument. After the articles, we've included some questions that might help you to formulate a thesis or a claim, right? To figure out what your primary claim will be for the essay. You should feel free, however, to generate your own questions and to choose your own thesis or claim. In other words, I call questions prompts because I don't care if you necessarily answer those specific questions, but I want to get you thinking and focused, right? So the questions, or what I've been calling prompts, are there to help you think. If you do end up responding to one, developing an argument in response to, as you were prompted by one of the questions, that's totally fine. But if you move in some different direction, that's fine too. You know how to write an argument about what you've read. You're a free thinker, an independent thinker, right? So read carefully and explain carefully what you have to say. Argue carefully the one claim that you want to argue about what you've read. So let's read first then, and we'll turn, excuse me, to this proposed legislation, right? Excuse me. So this was January 2003. Charles Rangel, Democrat, New York, ranking Democrat on the House Ways and Means Committee, introduced the Universal National Service Act of 2003. So let's look at the name of that. Universal National Service Act. A bill requiring that all young persons in the United States, including women, perform a period of military service or a period of civilian service in furtherance of the national defense and homeland security. This bill mandates compulsory national service for every citizen and every resident of the United States between the ages of 18 and 26. All right, I gave that so that you would know what I had written this exam several years ago. So when I ran the writing program. So I gave you that, or I gave the students at the time that this proposed legislation because then you'd be able to better follow the reading, which begins right after this bill, that summarizes two presidential candidates' views of this bill and some other people's views as of 2008 anyway. Okay, so let's look at some of the terms here. I'm going to be very careful about the terms. So this is a Universal National Service Act. So universal, look it up. You see what it means in this context. I'm not going to say anything about that. Universal, right? National, right? National Service Act, requiring all young persons in the United States, defined at the end of the proposed legislation as between 18 and 26. So there's a definition of young people. Which young people? If we look to the penultimate line again, the next to last line of that proposed legislation, every citizen and every resident. So not just U.S. citizens, but also U.S. residents, okay? Between the ages of 18 and 26. So they must perform a period, not defined in the bill, right? So obviously this is probably going to be discussed. Period of military service or civilian service, either one, military or civilian, in furtherance of the national defense and homeland security. So for these two reasons, remember this 2003, it's right after 9/11, right? Or close after that. So national service, national defense, and homeland security. The bill mandates compulsory. There's two words there. Mandate, have to. Compulsory, have to. Okay? National service for every citizen and every resident. All right, so that's what's being proposed. Be careful about those terms, especially when you look to the readings. Now, I'm going to go through them and help you summarize a few points, but I'm not going to say anything about what I think about them because who cares? It's your argument, okay? But I do want you to be careful of the terms. At a few moments, I'm going to sort of say, okay, look this up. Be sure you know what this means, but I'm not going to say what it means, all right? These are the sorts of things you should be thinking about when you take this final exam, okay? Pay attention to the terms. There won't be terms that you don't know, or there shouldn't be, okay? So universal, you know what that means, everywhere, right? No one's exempt, okay? So Article 1, Clark wants civilian reserve to provide national service. So this is from the New York Times, October 2003. So General Wesley Clark, who was on active duty in the military, of course, called yesterday for a national service program, all right? Envisioning a voluntary civilian reserve that would allow people to be activated in times of national need. Okay, look at these terms. National service program, very similar to the proposed legislation. Envisioning a voluntary, not compulsory, not universal, voluntary. I mean, if every single young person volunteered, then it would by definition be universal. It would be everybody. But this is a proposed voluntary civilian reserve. Civilian, not military and civilian, but civilian. So all I'm saying is, if you were to say that General Clark, for some reason, when you were making whatever argument you had to make about the proposed legislation from Charles Rangel, and you said Clark agrees with Rangel, not really, right? Probably in spirit, he wants young people to serve, but the terms of what he's calling for are different. And they're hugely different, have hugely different ramifications, okay? So voluntary versus compulsory, civilian versus civilian and military. So keep this in mind. Nothing to say about that right, wrong, or otherwise, but they're different. It's different what he wants, as described here. You will not and should not, you won't be able to do any research when you're reading the short articles you're given for this essay, and you don't need to, okay? So don't worry about what more a clerk might have thought or what more anyone might have thought. Just deal with what you're reading at the time that you're given it. So he's retired from the Army. He was the latest Democrat to embrace the concept of national service. So see there what the article is saying. Just this idea of having some sort of national service program. Now, what the details of it will look like and what the requirements will be or not, right, vary. But the point is that there's a concept, there's an idea that we need some sort of national service program sort of brewing. And so, under his proposal, people would register their skills and talents and be on call for 5 years. A tour of service would be 6 months. General Clark's plan would allow the president to call up 5,000 people for national emergencies. Okay, so 6 months, you're on call for 5 years, and you volunteer your time, your service for 6 months, and you're called on when you're needed in an emergency. All right, so I will go skip a bit down and say a few other things about the details. I'm not summarizing all of the details here. I'm just pointing out ways that you need to be careful about the terms. Again, we're doing this all semester. This is exactly what you'd need to do when you come in and take this exam on December 1st. So we go down a little bit and we see at the bottom of the page, it might be on the same page, might still be on the same page for you. I printed mine in a slightly bigger font because of my old eyes, okay? So if you go down to, let's see in there, 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth paragraph, beginning of the fifth paragraph. National service programs have been especially popular with Democratic presidential candidates. Senator John Edwards of North Carolina has proposed a community corps for high school students that would give grants to states that require students to participate in some form of community service to graduate. So that seems like it might be involuntary, not clear, right? Not sure. The point of the paragraph is just to say that this seems to be a Democratic item and something that Democrats are interested in, primarily anyway. John Kerry, who is also a Democrat of Massachusetts, called for a similar high school program as well as a chance for college students to earn the equivalent of their state's 4-year public college tuition in exchange for 2 years of service. So here's a way of connecting service, national service, to college tuition, right? To exchange for college tuition and so on. Okay, sort of something like, McCain was, Kerry was also, he was in the military, and, something like following up on the GI Bill right after World War II. You serve, you get 4 years of college, that kind of idea, but connecting it to probably, he doesn't say here, right? A similar high school program, community service. Maybe it's just civilian service he's talking about here. Probably is, but because we have college tuition in exchange for military service now, so he's probably talking about just creating a civilian corps of some kind. So let's move on then. So there's some of the just some details. So claiming that it's a Democratic agenda item primarily. And when we look to Article 2, the details of which I won't go through thoroughly, right? You're going to read this carefully. We hear that McCain and Obama find common ground on national service. So Senator John McCain recently died. You probably know this. Probably about a month ago. He was a Vietnam War prisoner of war, 5 years, a war veteran and hero, and a Republican, okay, who ran against Obama in 2008, which I'm sure you know, on the Republican ticket, of course, and Obama was the Democratic ticket, right? Now here, the title of the article, 2008, a few years after the previous article, is claiming that Republicans and Democrats are finding common ground on this issue. They were. I can tell you from experience that they were, but here it doesn't matter. You don't have to read more than that. But that's kind of the sense here. What the real sort of point of the article here is, that Republicans and Democrats are finding common ground. So John McCain and Barack Obama, I'm reading from the first paragraph. Now they're running for the 2000 election at this time. It's 2 months away from the election. Showed Thursday night probably referring to one of the debates, that they have more common ground than differences when it comes to making national service a priority in their presidential administrations. So both want, as a previous article said, to think of, have in mind some concept of national service. Okay, we don't know how, as far as that paragraph goes, we don't know how they're defining the terms of national service, but we'll go on and we'll learn a little bit more. Asked why it seems the terror attacks of September 11, 2001 are fading in the minds of many Americans, McCain, the Republican, said, "We needed at that time to take advantage of the unity in the United States of America." McCain criticized Bush for not taking advantage of that sense of unity and instead imploring the American public to live their lives as usual and go shopping, which is something that Bush had said at the time. Okay, so McCain is claiming here, saying in the next paragraph, I would have called them to serve. I would have taken that sense of unity, of everybody coming together and wanting to do something. I would have called them to serve. The GOP candidate said he suspects people feel uninspired by leaders in Washington and that Americans want change in federal government. McCain praised the Peace Corps and AmeriCorps. Peace Corps created, oh, this is horrible that I can't remember this. I believe it was Kennedy. I'm not sure. Oh, that's shameful. Anyway, AmeriCorps was created by Clinton, both Democrats, right? And McCain's praising this Democratic agenda at this point, saying they and similar organizations don't receive sufficient recognition from Washington. But he's careful to say, next sentence, government should limit its involvement. Okay, so he's got a qualification, and he's distinguishing himself from, what he perceives as the Democratic agenda here. So he says, I want a national service program, but I want limited involvement from the government. That's a typical sort of Republican platform point, right? So asked about compensation, he said, I'd be glad to reward volunteers as much as possible, but you want to be careful that the reason is not the reward of financial or other reasons, but the reward is the satisfaction of serving a greater cause. That's what this should be about. So McCain's point here is that he thinks, right, there's no word compulsory there, there's no word universal, there's an idea that we need volunteers to step up and serve. He would have called for volunteers. There's a difference from the Rangel proposed legislation. All right. And he does not want them, he wants them to be rewarded somehow, but not to be going into it because they're going to be paid. Right. So unclear. Probably this article is short. McCain probably thought about it more carefully, had more to say about it, would have had more to say had he been elected president, I think. But he's thinking clearly, sort of, like, not sure yet exactly what my terms are for this, but I want it to be voluntary, right? And I want there to be a reward, but I don't want people doing this because there's a reward. I want them doing this because they want to serve a cause greater than themselves. So he was addressing, this idea of serving something larger than yourself and not thinking only about yourself was what was partly important to him in imagining a national service program. Next paragraph, Obama said his views don't necessarily differ from McCain's, and they're quite similar, as we'll find out. So Obama, Democrat, obviously, president, said creating opportunities for national service would be a priority for his administration as well. Now, creating opportunities, not clear if it's voluntary or mandatory yet, right? But trying to provide ways that people can serve. Not clarified yet, right? Part of what makes America work, he says, I'm reading the quotation, is the fact that we believe in individual responsibility and self-reliance, but we also believe in mutual responsibility, in neighborliness, in a sense that we are committed to something larger than ourselves. And they're very similar to what, almost exactly the same, at least in the latter portion of what McCain said, right? As what McCain said. So we have this sense of self-reliance and we have this sense of having a duty to others as well. So he says it's something larger than ourselves. We've got that sense. So they're very much on the same page on this. So Obama cites a plan to provide college tuition aid in return for student community service. So there's some sort of reward tuition. One of my central platforms is we're going to provide a $4,000 tuition credit to every student every year, but in exchange for giving something back. So young people of modest means who are interested in going to college, this gives them an opportunity to serve and at the same time pay for their college education. All right, so he wants us to just keep thinking about this, right? There's a little bit, that's all I'll say actually about this article, right? But look at the terms. Obama doesn't say anything about whether this should be universal or voluntary either, but it does seem to be there's similar to McCain, this way of sort of calling them or trying to provide incentives for them to do this sounds like it's probably voluntary, right? Okay, so the last article I am not going to say a word about, and the reason for that is that this year's proficiency exam is doing something a little bit different, as I was telling you in class. This year, you'll be provided some of the readings ahead of time, and you'll be provided, and we'll discuss those in class the week of the exam before you take it. You'll be writing on these. You'll have time to think about them. And you'll go in on December 1st in the morning, and you'll be handed a new article, possibly two, but I think just one. I'm not quite sure myself. We'll find out when we get there. But it'll be a reasonable amount that you can read and take in the amount of time you're given. And it will be probably some sort of article that has a different take from what you've read, or provides some sort of new kind of information, perhaps refutes what you read. I have no idea. But it will be different in some way. And this Article 3 on national service is different in some way from the previous two articles. That's all I'll say. It's different in some way. So you need to figure out what to do with it, right? Do you use it? Do you not use it? Why do you use it or not? How will you incorporate it if you do? But that's all I'll say, okay? So let's review what you need to do for this essay, because you know very well what you need to do, but let's just do it, okay? You need to create one claim, come up with one claim in response to the prompts, which we'll turn to in a minute. You need to define the terms of your claim. You need to understand and define the terms of what you've read, right? You're going to need that in there as you discuss what you want to say. And you're going to be sure that you're focused on that single claim. You're not going all over the place. You're not bringing in irrelevant information. You're developing one idea at a time to support that claim, to clarify that claim in paragraphs 2, 3, 4, however many paragraphs you have. You will have a conclusion to your argument that explains the so what, or the significance of what you've said. Okay? Why does it matter what you said? What are the consequences? What's the significance? Okay? You do not repeat everything you've already said. You might briefly gesture at what you've said, sure, but this is not a place to simply tell me everything you've already said as a reader of your essay. Don't want to hear it, right? I know what you said. So now, so what? What's the significance? What's at stake for us in being convinced of in what you have to say? Okay, so you're also going to write your very best, very clearly. You're going to clean up your sentences, leave yourself some time, maybe a half an hour on this exam to go through and clean up your sentences. You can go through and make last minute changes in your final draft if you want to clean things up. But you write your very best sentences, right? You proofread, all right? You cite what you have used, and here you do the best you can to cite with the information you're given. Okay, you're given most of it. Excuse my cough. You're given most of what you need, but just show that you understand that you need to cite what you're reading, right? Cite the page numbers that you're reading from, but just, if it's not perfect, that's fine. We just expect you to know that you need to cite. You don't just quote without citing anything, all right? You don't refer to an article without telling me who wrote the article. You don't talk about a General Wesley Clark without giving me his name. The basics, this, okay? So let's look at just one of what are called here pre-writing questions. This is what I call prompts. These are the essay prompts I've been giving you all term. I am going to look at, just briefly, let's look at number 4. All right. What are the problems national service is meant to address? Do you think, um, I left a pronoun out there. Do you think it can successfully address these problems? So focus. Read the essays. You know, as described by the short articles, what the problems are that national service is meant to address. So think about what those are. Do you think it can successfully address these problems? Now you need to think about this. So I would focus on one category of problem that national service is meant to address or to resolve, right, in some way, or to help with in some way. And then you have to be careful about what you mean by national service. Why? Because that's the key. That's where you're defining your terms. Which form of national service are you talking about, right? Which one are you referring to? I've reviewed some of the terms. I won't say what those are here. You can listen to this lecture again. But don't just blanket national service as if it means one clear thing to everybody who's discussing it. It does not. We've just seen that. So you need to determine which form of national service you're talking about and describe I would recommend one category of problem that it's meant to address. And then you need to say, do you think it will address that problem or these problems, this category of problems, or not? Will that form of national service address this category of problems or not? And why do you think so? So you want to be as precise as you can. You'll be using what you've read about because you know that there are specific problems that are meant to be addressed by specific forms of service. And you will have a chance to, bring up your own examples, right? So if there's an example of, I'm going to pick something totally random that has nothing to do with national service. If there's an example of, let's see, what's a way that I can address poverty in Syracuse, right? I'm not talking about national service right now. I need to define what that problem is. What the biggest problem I think is of poverty. Let's say that I think it's malnutrition. Okay, that's one category of problems. I'm going to want to talk about the problems, specific kinds of malnutrition that concern me. Let's say that I'm concerned about malnutrition in young children. Okay, and let's say that I have an idea in mind for how to solve malnutrition. I need to tell you what that idea is, what kind of program I think we should create, or how, maybe not a program, just how I think I might address that problem. And then I have to imagine how that would work. And then I have to imagine someone disagreeing with me and saying, well, that kind of way of addressing the problem would not work because of this. And I need to discount that refutation or show as best as I can that refutation, that my argument is a better one, that my reason for proposing to solve the problem or address the problem my way is better than this refutation's way. Both could be valid, but I want to show that mine is the better option. Okay, try to convince my reader that mine is the better option. So I'd imagine that I was probably talking to, the mayor of Syracuse or something like that, or a local representative, okay? Just so I could be really clear, like, what's at stake? Why do I want to solve this problem? What do I know about it? What do I really want my local legislator to think about? How am I going to convince this person? So I try to be as specific as I can. You don't need to think of a specific person when you're writing this argument, but you do need to be as specific as you can about which form of national service you're talking about, what problem, how that form of service can address this problem, and then whether it can or not, and whether you think it would work or not. Okay? All of these questions require that you be very clear about your terms, you define your terms, and you focus. And you know all of that. So pre-writing question, again, is just prompt, essay prompt, as I call it in my class, right? This exam looks pretty much exactly like what you'll see on December 1st, except that you'll come and you'll be given a new reading. or 2 I said. I think just 1, but we'll know more about that in the last week. Okay, so good luck. You are all set, and you can listen to this lecture as often as you like.